We're so excited to be speaking to Shezza Abboushi Dallal, who is a staff attorney with the CLEAR Project at CUNY School of Law and a member of Mahmoud Khalil's legal defense team. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Katie. Mahmoud has now spent over a month in ICE detention. He came to be the victim of a very aggressive doxing campaign, especially in the month leading up to his abduction by ICE. So aggressive in the calls for his deportation and harm to him that he actually even pled with Columbia University's administration in the days leading up to his detention for help, and ultimately to no avail and to no assistance by Columbia University. And he was whisked off in the middle of the night across multiple state lines, all the way to Louisiana, a forum that is conveniently favorable to the government. And so we filed suit challenging the constitutionality of his detention and his targeting by the Trump administration because it plainly violates the First Amendment protections that he has as a person in this country, even though he is a non-citizen and as a green card holder, which he is. It's plain as day that he is being targeted for his speech and his protest and his advocacy for Palestinian rights, for the Palestinian people, for their lives. And the Trump administration has made no mystery of this. They've not tried to obscure it. In fact, they have been flaunting that they are going after him for exactly that reason from day one of his abduction by their agents in the nighttime. And that's where we stand today. So we're battling out his case on multiple fronts. I think folks have seen in the news that we had some pretty major developments on one front, which is the immigration court case that he is battling in Louisiana, where they whisked him off again in the dead of the night. We had some developments on that front last week, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. And then his federal court case is in New Jersey as of today, and that case is very much alive, and we are pushing for his return to the area, for his release to his wife in time for him to be able to witness alongside his wife the birth of his first child. And ultimately, we'll continue fighting until his constitutional rights to free speech and due process are vindicated in federal court. And that's where we are today.
Can you explain the difference between the immigration case and the federal case, and also what it was that happened on Friday?
Absolutely. So there are two parallel tracks in his case. There's the immigration case in Louisiana, and there's his federal case that's playing out here in New Jersey. So the federal case is the one where we are challenging the constitutionality and legality of his being targeted by the Trump administration, his transfer, and his detention, right? We are laying bare that he was targeted because of his advocacy for Palestinian rights, and we're seeking his release on that basis, and ultimately for the Trump administration's policy of targeting people for their advocacy for Palestinian rights, for their speech, for their protest, to be stopped as it relates to him, but also generally. And so that is the federal case here in New Jersey. At the same time, the Trump administration is pursuing his deportation in immigration court in Louisiana. And again, I return to it's exactly by design that things have played out the way that they have on that front. Right? The Trump administration ensured that he would be taken to a forum that is favorable to their administration. And it is before that immigration court that he had his hearing this past Friday. And I think it's worth noting that, an immigration judge is essentially an employee of the executive branch and serves at the pleasure of the president. And therefore, the decisions that they make at every stage of a case are largely subject to the influence and will of the executive. And so it's exactly by design, right, that we have the decision that was reached on Friday after 2 hours of Mr. Khalil's immigration counsel trying and being blocked from making arguments challenging the Secretary of State's determination that all of this is based on, the judge read what appeared to be a pre-written decision from a paper ordering him removable. And so we're now in a stage called the relief stage, where Mr. Khalil will have the opportunity to raise grounds of relief to be able to continue to stay in the country by the end of April, by April 23rd. And most importantly, I think it bears mentioning that we were not surprised by this very unfortunate and awful decision, because it plays out exactly as the government intended to, in a forum that is ultimately going to be favorable to the Trump administration. And what really matters here is the case that we have in New Jersey in federal court. That is where he will be able to access real due process rights and have his case ultimately vindicated. That's where we are today.
And what can people do to support him, and not just Mahmoud, but all people who are being disenfranchised, rounded up, thrown into jail, detained, unlawfully detained? What can people do to support Mahmoud and others like him?
I think people across this country are rightfully outraged and cannot accept that this can be so, that this can happen to anybody. Whether it be a non-citizen, a student visa holder, or a green card holder, or a US citizen, right? That anybody would be targeted for their organizing for Palestinian rights, for something that really should be celebrated and that resonates with a majority of Americans who feel that we should not be putting our tax money behind state-sponsored genocide in another country. And so I think we need to continue to make that clear, that this is not something that we will stand for. I think ultimately the Trump administration is banking on people being overwhelmed by the number of folks being targeted, or sort of falling into fatigue, seeing just how many people are facing consequences for their organizing, falling into silence. And we need to push back on that, understanding that today they go after non-citizens, today they go after student visa holders and green card holders, and tomorrow anybody is fair game. Anybody who is dissenting, who is daring to articulate views, daring to protest for positions that challenge the United States government and their policies and practices around the world, that they too will fall victim to whatever the Trump administration seeks to do. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us in public society, in our movements on the streets, and in our schools, and in our universities, and in our workplaces, and in the courts as well, to make sure that this just can't be so.
And, a lot of Trump defenders will say, oh, well, he had a green card. He was here it's not a right. He was here. We were doing him a favor. He doesn't get protection, First Amendment protection. He lied. But the Trump administration also at the same time makes it clear this is not about breaking any laws. So can you correct some of those myths that we see circulating?
Myths and also plain error. Some of the most foundational constitutional law in this country, that is not just a few years old, but decades old, says that persons in the United States have First Amendment rights, are protected by the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court—
It's settled law, right?
It is settled law. It is more than settled law. It's foundational law in this country. Yeah. It is, yeah, absolutely. People have First Amendment rights. That's true of everybody here, citizens and non-citizens alike. That's true whether you think their views are right or wrong. It is just the law. And in this case, Mahmoud Khalil is advocating for the dignity and survival and livelihood of people, of the Palestinian people. Those are views that a growing majority of people in this country support. I think one of the things that the Trump administration and others aligned with those views are trying to do is make it seem like these are fringe views that can be deported, right? We can deport people that have that hold these views that people should live in dignity, whether here or there, and that'll take care of the problem. But you can't, because Mahmoud isn't alone. He has the company of a very big movement for social justice, for the liberation of the Palestinian people, and also for social, racial, and economic justice across vulnerable communities in the United States who are also on the line here. So, we can't deport our political opponents. We can't deport people that are trying to hold the government accountable and pursuing justice. It's just not possible, and we can't stand for it.
And can you talk more about what you just referred to, how this basically fits a larger pattern of repression, surveillance, and criminalization of speech, criminalization of marginalized communities? So we see this is obviously an issue that relates to Palestine, but it also goes beyond Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think we're seeing it across communities that are struggling in order to protect immigrant communities, protect queer and trans communities, protect Muslim communities, and certainly we're seeing it. We've seen, not just under this administration, but under the last as well, a major repressive movement against the movement for Palestinian liberation. And I think it's a mistake to think that the abuses that the Trump administration gets away with in this moment will stay cabined against one people or one community. And it's a large one, because there are so many people that are advocating for an end to the genocide in Gaza and for Palestinian rights, right? But it would be a mistake to think that if they get away with this here, they won't against the next population of people dissenting, taking a position that is contrary to the government's primary lines and policies. And I think we're seeing movements for liberation across the board in this country moving together, refusing to accept what is happening to Mahmoud Khalil and many others, from Rumaisa Ozturk to Yonseo Chung, to Ranjani Srinivasan, to Badr Khan Suri. The list goes on. Today, Mohsen Mahdawi. The list only grows, and so too do the people refusing to accept that this can happen to any of us.
Can you tell us what you know about the latest student, Mohsen Mahdawi, who you just mentioned?
Yeah, the latest reports, Mohsen is a green card holder who went to his naturalization interview just earlier today and was abducted by ICE in broad daylights and out of his naturalization interview. He's a Palestinian man. This is, again, another person in a growing list of people who are being retaliated against because they have spoken out for, protested for, stood up for Palestinian rights. The Trump administration is unrelenting in their pursuit for punishment of people that have, again, held these views and spoken out for their people and the Palestinian people in general. And we need to be too.
And are you in touch with Mahmoud? And if so, what are his spirits like right now?
I think anybody who has the opportunity should take a look at the statement that he made at the end of his removal proceedings on Friday. He addressed the court, addressed the immigration judge, and ultimately addressed the public. And I think it's so emblematic of how he is and also who he is. He pointed out how little due process there was to be seen in that proceeding. And then he used the rest of his time to call attention to those around him, other folks who are embroiled in unjust immigration proceedings in immigration courts. One of the strategies that the government has employed here is to speed up his immigration case because they know that's a favorable forum for them, while they raise a number of procedural and jurisdictional grounds in federal court to slow things down and keep people detained for as long as possible, and keep them from being able to have their constitutional claims claims heard. And so he says in his comments, I hope that you afford the people around me the same experience that you have my case, acknowledging that so many people wait weeks and months and years in detention, languishing before they can have an immigration hearing. He has fighting spirits, an eye for justice, and he's ready to continue fighting his legal battle.
Well, that is so great to hear. I mean, it's so upsetting on the one hand, but it's also so incredibly inspiring to hear his words and read his words. And in the face of such repression, he is fearless.
That's right. And I really hope, for his sake and all of our sakes, that as soon as possible he can be out, that the federal court will order his release and he can witness the birth of his first child.
Yeah, definitely. That would be, it's such an injustice that it's even possible that he won't. So, and thank you so much, Shezza, for all that you do. You're on the front lines. You really do make concrete differences in people's lives. And I'm sure it's very depressing at sometimes, but it must be, does it get to be inspiring also?
It's incredible to see the resilience of the clients that we're serving in this moment, and all the folks who are standing their grounds in the causes that they have spoken up for and protested for, who are enduring impossible circumstances, sort of ripped away from their communities and to far off states, sitting in ICE detention, not to make mention of the countless students and community members who are not in ICE detention but are fearing that they could be next, but nonetheless standing their ground in what they believe in and what they advocate for. I really draw immense inspiration from that, and we'll keep doing what we're doing until we see some justice.
Thank you so much, Shezza. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.